This game shows the importance of pawn structure in endgames with knights and rooks, and it also illustrates that sometimes pawn weaknesses may be actually to your advantage as long as the pawn structure is such that it allows your pieces to be active. So a superficial look at the position may create an impression that black's pawn structure is really bad. It's a bunch of isolated and double pawns. But things are not so simple, because black's pieces are more active than white's pieces. Black controls the c file, and his knight is coming to c4 pretty soon. And white has his own weaknesses, like the pawn on a3 and the pawn on e3. So a lot of the stuff, a lot on this position depends on how the players utilize the strengths of their position. And Botvinnik managed to outplay his opponent in this position from the black side. So black created the pressure against the e3 pawn, and this forced the white knight to retreat to a rather passive position. So this is a very important moment, because the black rook has finally invaded along the c file, and now it begins to threaten the pawns on a3 and e3. So white had to respond very carefully. He had to play king to d2, forcing the check, rook d3, and then the king can then just go back, and black doesn't really have a good way to continue. If white takes on b5, that's also not good, because then black plays rook to c2, and the rook is very good on the second rank, and then white's probably going to lose the pawn on f3. The move played in the game isn't very good either, because it allows black to really put his pieces to the best squares, and the knight and the rook are going to coordinate really well together in the game. So Botvinnik managed to get the most out of his position, and now black has an edge here. Black has a passed pawn on the d file, and what's more important, he will be able to support this pawn with all of his pieces, the king, the knight, and the rook, whereas it's going to take a really long time for white to ever get his pawn going on the queen side. So after long maneuvers, the pawn finally advances. With his last couple of moves, white exchanged a pair of pawns, which is a reasonable idea if you're trying to make a draw. Then simplifying the position and removing the pawns is a good idea. But on the other hand, the pawn structure changed in such a way that it's going to be easier for black to create a passed pawn along the h file, and that was eventually the decisive factor in this game. So the black pawn has advanced much faster than the white pawn on the a file, and now white has to be really careful to make sure that the d pawn doesn't promote. Here black could take the knight on e3 and win the piece, but because there's really nothing that white can do at this point anyway, Botvinnik first improves the position of his king and doesn't hurry to win the piece. And now, just at the time when the white king has approached the pawn on d2, black begins the advance of his last remaining pawn on the h file, and that's what's going to decide the game, because the white king cannot really hold both the d pawn and the h pawn. the timing of this is just right. If white takes back on d1, then black plays knight to e3, and this distracts the white knight from blocking the h-pawn. Because of this, black is going to inevitably promote the h-pawn, so white resigned. The way Botvinnik conducted this game and the way he coordinated the knight, the pawn, and the rook, and then the king, it's quite remarkable and very instructive.